Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the state's NDCAP Commission Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel for the Pilgrim Power Station. Today is Monday, May 22nd, and before we do a roll call, I want to welcome some distinguished visitors, aside from our state delegation representatives. That is Mr. Kevin Canty and Mr. Richard Quintal, the chair and vice chair, respectively, of the Plymouth Select Board. In the back, we also have town manager, Mr. Derek Brindisi, and also assisting us tonight with tonight's meeting is Officer Perkins from the Plymouth Police Department. Thank you, Officer Perkins. So let's go into roll call of attendance, starting at my right, moving to the left, Mr. Dave Noyes.
Dave Noyes, Holtec Decommissioning International.
John Moylan, Site Vice President, Holtec.
Kelly O'Brien, Local 369.
Mike Fortini, appointed by the Senate Minority Leader.
Jim Lampert, appointed by the, excuse me, the House is bad. Speaker of the House.
Mary Gatzlick, Minority Leader appointee, the Senate.
Pine Dubois, also Speaker of the House.
John Mahoney, Plymouth Select Board designee.
Mary Lampert, appointed by the Senate President.
Jack Priest, representing Commissioner for the Massachusetts Department of Public Health.
Seth Pickering from Mass DEP. I'm appointed by the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs.
And Henrietta Cosentino, appointed by the Plymouth Select Board.
All right, thank you. Now we'll go to the attendees who are up on the screen. I think I see Mr. Gottlieb.
Andrew Gottlieb, appointed by Governor Baker.
Ms. Waldron.
Good evening, Mary Waldron, Old Colony Planning Council.
Mr. Nichols.
Good evening, David Nichols, appointed by Governor Baker.
Pine, who else we got? Besides Jennifer. What's Jennifer's last name? We have a new member tonight. Is Jennifer Robertson here tonight?
Yes, that's me. Hi, nice to meet everybody. I am the designee for EHS.
Okay, Jennifer, welcome. Thank you. See any other attendees, Pine? Okay. All right, looks like we've have everybody checked in who is currently in attendance. Listen, I'm going to skip over the next agenda item, which is meeting minutes, reviewing the minutes from the prior meeting. We're going to go right into the legislative update, and that's because Senator Sue Moran apparently is standing on a street corner in Boston staring into her phone. So, Senator Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also appreciate your welcoming the special Plymouth guests and Board of Selectmen members and Town Manager. Thank you all. And you're right, I am here on Beacon Hill, but I wanted to give a quick update on an amendment that has been revamped that I filed before that went through approvals through both the House and the Senate and then was vetoed by Governor Baker. It would require a full study of the environmental and economic impacts of spent fuel pool water discharge before DEP issues a discharge permit to Holtec. I've worked with my colleagues in the Senate, the Attorney General, and Department of Environmental Protection to strengthen the language that was vetoed. The new language includes the same commission that would study the environmental and economic impacts of dumping and submit its report by November of 2025. But instead of a blanket prohibition on dumping until the commission completes its report, the language prohibits DEP from approving any surface water discharge permits specifically related to dumping spent nuclear fuel pool water until the commission completes its report. So we have vetted it. We're very optimistic. I also want to mention that coming up soon, I know the Department of Environmental Protection will present their initial findings of contaminants in the untreated spent fuel water. These findings, I think, present more evidence that we must fully understand the impact, both short-term and long-term, that these contaminants will have in our community moving forward. Once the Senate debate completes later this week, because we are in the middle of budget, both the House and Senate versions will be sent to conference. And we must work with the House representatives to ensure that the importance of this study, including the language in the final version, is what will be sent to the governor later this summer. And I just really want to thank my colleagues in the House on the South Shore and in Cape Cod, who have been really strident advocates on moving this forward. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this accommodation. It's very appreciated.
Thank you, Senator. Rep. Muratori, did you have anything to add to this, or was that sufficient? Okay. All right, thank you. Now we'll want to check in with the federal delegation. Any representatives? Mr. Jackman, you all set at this meeting, or do you have any updates from Congressman Keating's office?
No updates, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Just looking forward to the discussion and hearing back some of the reports that we anticipate tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. How about Ben Thomas? No. Matthew. Matthew Muratori. Rep. Muratori.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. I didn't have any more comments on her part, and she's doing a great job with that bill that she's putting through, and I think we'll have a good success with that. I'm here just to give you a quick update on bill number H3199 that Rep. Lenatra and I filed back in January. We came before you in January, told you about that bill. We were trying to make some changes to this panel as it exists. After that meeting in January, we heard feedback from many folks, spoke to a lot of people, met with the Lamberts, Ben Cronin, others. And by March, we actually had some initial people were going to be adding to that. I think that was some of the concern. That wasn't the reason why we did that. We filed that bill, but there was some concerns about adding additional people, so we are doing that. We actually had the hearing last Thursday, and I promised I would come to you when we did, as it was progressing, and we did have the hearing on Thursday. Was it Thursday, Mary? Yeah, Thursday. It was Thursday morning. Mr. and Mrs. Lambert joined us as well. So we presented the bill, asked for a favorable reading, but we are working on redraft of that bill. So they're going to accept the redraft that we're going to be present to them, hopefully by Wednesday or Thursday this week. Mr. Lambert's going to help us with the amendments to add that. We'll get that off to them, and if they accept the redrafts, we're going to ask them to get that bill out as soon as possible out of the committee so we can move it along. If they don't accept the redrafts, then we will go back and we'll file a new bill. But we'll keep you informed every step of the way as we go.
What's the bill number?
H3199? Yeah, 3199.
Any other questions for Rep. Muratori? Okay, Matthew, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt Representative Muratori, but I did want to point out that my colleagues, Caleb White from Senator Warren's office is on the Zoom, and Ben Thomas is on in the general as a attendee, but not on a panelist. So Ben Thomas from Senator Markey's office. We're all here, and I think we're all in listening mode tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And welcome, Caleb and Ben.
And Chris is from Senator Representative Lenata's office.
Christine, I see. Yep, thank you. Christine, for being here from Rep. Lenatra's office. Thank you. And Matthew, did you know this? But I graduated from high school with his mother. Small world. Okay, moving on. All right, going back to item at number 2 on the agenda, previous minutes review and approval. Anybody have any questions or corrections with respect to the March meeting? Dave Noyes.
On the, and I'm not sure which page it is, but it's on the section of the Holtec update. right on the bottom of the page, it incorrectly states that Mr. Noyes reiterated that Holtec had committed to conducting the study, and then references a portion of the meeting from the YouTube. What had happened was that Mr. Gottlieb asked whether Holtec would support having the study done, and I indicated that we were committed to doing that. So we're not committed to conducting the study. We are committed to having the study done. So, sorry for the little language, but it's important.
But that is significant.
Thank you.
Any other concerns? Henrietta?
I actually haven't found it. It's just, it's a spelling, I believe. Henrietta, is your microphone on? Oh, I'm sorry. The spelling of Margaret Raskin's name, I believe, needs correction. It's on the second to last page. Margaret Rudkin should be corrected to Raskin, R-A-S-K-I-N.
Where on that page?
That's
Oh, I see it. Never mind.
kind of in the middle, right in the middle.
Spell
Is
it
it
again for
small?
me.
R-A-S-K-I-N.
R-A-S-K-I-N. Any other considerations? I see a motion to approve the minutes with the noted corrections.
I make a motion to approve.
Was that Mr. Lampert with the second? Okay. Pine Dubois with the motion, and Mr. James Lampert with the second. Any discussion on the minutes? I see no discussion. All those in favor of approving the minutes with the noted adjustments? Mary, you in on this one?
Oh, yes.
Okay, great. All right. All those opposed? Jennifer, are you sending this one out?
Yes, since I wasn't there, I will abstain.
So it looks like it's I'm sorry, 1 abstention, 0 against, and everyone else remaining here in favor. All right, take your time. No hurry. All right, all right, moving on to agenda item number 4. Review, discuss, and vote on to submit the 2022 annual report. And we'll turn it over to Mary Gatzlick.
Just ask a question. for
Yes,
the
Mr.
point of
Lambert.
Information. I guess my real question is, I noticed that we are going to vote on something. Precisely what document are we expected to vote on?
I thought you should know.
Because the reason I ask the question is that my understanding of the rules is if the majority of this panel votes to approve, and obviously then to submit the document you vote on and submit to approve is it. It can't be changed thereafter. But the motion, the one that was circulated, I question whether it's really in form for submission anywhere. But I just raise the question, we need to remember that anything we vote to approve, that's it. Can't be rewritten afterward.
Right. So, Jim, again, what's your primary concern here?
My concern is that the 0514 version that was submitted, and I hope everyone has a chance to read it, is quite clearly not a final document. There are a number of comments in it. I think Ms. Dubois, covering email, noted some places at which at least additions needed to be made. My suggestion is that we all remember, if people want to clean it up or make any suggestions, that needs to be done before it is voted on and approved. Because once it has been approved by this panel for submission, my understanding of all the procedures and rules is that's it.
It's an interesting opinion, Mr. Lambert. However, you did submit additional changes and comments on that for the 514. So I'd like to address those comments. And really, some of what's a little bit changed from the 514 document that's out there is a sentence or two here or there, an additional reference. So overall, there's not a change. I think listen, we should have had this report. I'm not trying to be confrontational, but this report should have been submitted in January. The reason why there's a draft watermark on it is so that it doesn't get out to the public, because it was a working document. I still consider this a working document. Today's final version, what we vote on, will be the version that will be published for the NDCAP annual report.
Fine, that was my question.
All right? So this is what's going to happen.
I just wanted to be clear, apparently we're in complete understanding, whatever we finally vote on, assuming it's approved, is the one that will be published.
We're going to be working off the version that Pine sent out in the most recent email. Okay?
Perfectly understandable.
Excellent. Great. I'm glad. With that in mind, I'm going to go through your email that you sent out to all the NDCAP members about your comments on what should and shouldn't be included. And to be, excuse me, honest with you, it's a hill I'm willing to die on, is that anything that occurs in 2023 will be reported in 2023. We are not going to update the 2022 report to include information that's been in the last 3 meetings. That can be covered in the 2023 report.
As I said, I think that is a subject that needs to be discussed as opposed to being laid down as of what we're obviously going to do. Go ahead.
Honestly, sir, I don't think it needs to be discussed. 2022 deals with 2022. 2023 deals with 2023. I can ask the rest of the panel whether you agree or not, or we're going to go on this until next year.
I simply
please
point
feel free
out.
to chime in, guys.
All right,
I just don't want it to be
Mary,
a one-way conversation.
continue with the presentation.
Okay. So we start with item A on page 1.
What
All right.
document are you looking at?
Your notes, sir?
Is this the document that Pines circulated as resolution?
No, sir. It's a document of comments that you sent out on why it shouldn't be, you had more changes to be made and more comments on it.
I just wanted to be sure what document we're talking about.
Comments on the 914 document that you commented on?
That I sent to Pine and to John.
I'm sorry, repeat, sir?
That I sent to Pine and to John.
That's correct. And I was surprised that it wasn't copied on that meeting, that email, because I am trying to get the report together. Needless to say, item A, where you say it starts with a majority of the panel agrees or not. We already know that I'm sorry.
What are you talking?
Pardon
I'm
me?
not sure I understand where you are. You're talking about as part.
Best way to do it then, may I suggest, is that we go through the 514 report and we see if there's any changes. Are you okay with that, what Pine sent out?
Mary, just to correct you, I think it's 519.
519,
point.
thank you.
I've got this, and I have this.
So does anybody have any other comments on the 519 report? I kept the 2023 information out of the 2022 report. Doesn't need to be there, it can be covered in 2022. Do you guys agree with it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No.
No.
No, I think it should be discussed because, for example, not waiting a year to inform the governor, to inform the legislature, to inform the public, the dramatic change in finances, for example, that Entergy now has in the Decommissioning Trust Fund should be made public.
Well, it is public. As a matter of fact, in this report, where we discuss that, I actually add a link as a footnote to the 2023 decommissioning report. At the time when this report was being written for 2022, that decommissioning fund report was not going to be submitted until March 31st of 2023. So if anybody is interested in seeing what the current condition of it, they can follow that footnote, and it'll link it right to the current report.
Mary, with due respect, that means it's buried in a footnote. And I believe the purpose, one of the questions raised in this whole debate is what is the purpose of the report, of the annual report? It is not, as I understand it, simply to present a summary of the minutes of what occurred in 2022, but rather it is supposed to be a report to the governor and the state agencies about what actually is going on and what the concerns are of the NDCAP regarding Pilgrim. And that does not mean simply a slavish devotion to what was said in each meeting or a summary of the above. And this financial information is absolutely of the first importance to the governor. I can't understand how it should be dismissed or buried in a footnote.
It's not dismissed. In the
Buried
body
in
of
a
the report-
footnote.
I'm sorry. In the body of the report, it says that these numbers will be changed in the 2023 submission.
No, but that's a year from now.
No, it's already been submitted. It was submitted in 2023. This report is for 2022. I wish you guys would
Fine.
understand that.
Pine?
Thank you. So what we're trying to accomplish with this report is to meet the order of the legislation that formed the NDCAP, which says, to advise the governor, general court, agencies of the Commonwealth, and public on issues related to the decommissioning with a written report provided annually to the governor and the agencies. And this report shall be an annual report.
I disagree.
As described in Clause 3. That's in the legislation. What I do after every meeting is post all of the new information to the NDCAP website, which is a state website run by the EEA and has all of the information on it, which is much more readily available than waiting for an annual report. So to your comment, Henrietta, it is immediate, and to your comment, Lampert's, it is an annual report. And this committee, this panel has decided to do that. First, we were doing it from July to July, and then we did it from July to September, and then we did it from January to December. We didn't do it for 18 months or 19 months or 30 months or whatever the Lamperts want. So that's the take.
May I speak, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lampert.
First off, Pine accurately read you the statute. But what I would note is it does not say annual report. It says you will report annually. There is, may I continue without interruption?
Only if you complete the chapter.
You know what, if you'll give me a moment.
Go ahead, Mr. Lampert.
I hope not. To me, there is a massive difference between reporting only what perhaps specifically happened, what this panel specifically talked about during a year, and providing the governor, the legislature, the public, with a report annually that provides them the information that report is supposed to include, which is issues relating to the decommissioning of Pilgrim. I would point out just for two things. One, I have a very different reading than obviously Ms. Gaslick do, which the majority of the panel may or may not disagree with, may agree with. Second, I would point out with respect to at least one item, the condition of Holtec's finances. What we are, the report has a paragraph in it that says Holtec's at the end of 2021 had $248 million leftover, excuse me, let me get my friend, had $300 million more in its decommissioning trust fund than it had at the end of 2032, this year, end of 2022. To state only what they had at the end of 2021 and not to state what they had at the end of 2022, and that is a 2022 fact, strikes me as perilously close to intentionally misleading the legislature as to the status of how much money is really available. Whether we're going to get picky in terms of, oh, did this happen in 2022, did this happen in 2023, at least on this subject, strikes me as a little beside the point. To me, the important thing is that the report that we file not be misleading when we very easily can, with 2 or 3 sentences, can make clear that it is accurate and that we give the correct figures so that the governor, the public, and the legislature know what they're dealing with, as opposed to having to wait perhaps 15, perhaps 18 months to be told that, oh, the number we gave you was only what they had at the end of 2021. We didn't bother to tell you what they had at the end of 2022.
Mr. Chair.
Jack?
So the financial report provided by Holtec has been submitted to the state in the manner that we've agreed on how that would do per the settlement agreement. So it's not a case that the government and the public is unaware of the current financial issues that were brought up in the most recent financial report. It's in our minutes. It's can be made available on the NDCAP website. I'd suggest, to break this logjam, Mr. Chair, I would suggest you poll the members and ask whether we want to have an annual report, which is essentially a calendar year report, or I'm not sure how to describe if we have another meeting 2 months from now, whether that would be in this draft of the report. So
This has
we're
to be
not
resolved.
getting any traction here. We've gone through 2 meetings. We've had multiple shots at trying to put out a calendar year report. I would suggest you poll the panel to determine what does the panel want to do with regards to an annual report.
So the history of the panel has been to do a calendar annual report. And just picking up on Mr. Priest's comments, if any representative in our federal or state delegation or Ms. Healy didn't know what the finances of this entity was, then that would be a dereliction of duty. They have all this information. There might be more important things that we need to apprise them of, but certainly on this one, I think we're getting bogged down. We need to continue. Do you have anything else to continue?
No,
with,
I
Mary?
agree with you. It should be from January to December, and with the data that's there. And you, as you said before, the data is available.
It is to encompass, it is basically a summary of what occurred at the meetings in the calendar year, and anything significant with respect to changes in the industry and the status of where they are in the decommissioning in that process. So,
Only during that year, correct?
in my opinion.
Yep.
I think you're really amending what the legislation says, a report annually, which you are now defining to be from January to the end of December. So are we going to vote on that? I just think it's a very narrow, inaccurate review of the English language, but.
Dave Nichols?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll move it along. I'd like to make a motion that the panel continue in its process of doing a calendar year report, and that we keep 2023 activities for 2023 if they're absolutely critical. Members of the public, members of this panel are always welcome to write letters on their own to government officials to point out some of these issues that they think are so critical. And we can also, as a panel, take up whether we want to do some sort of interim report I don't think there's anything that precludes us from ever communicating with government officials. In fact, they sit on this panel, so I think they're hearing the same things. So I think we have much more important issues to talk about than what the dates for this report are, and it sounds kind of childish. So I would hope that we could pass a resolution to keep it confined to 2022 and then move forward.
Second?
I would second that motion, Mary Waldron.
Thank you, Mary. Any discussion on this motion? All right, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of Dave Nichols' motion, raise your hand. We gotta count this. Okay. All those against the motion? Mary, Jim, and Henrietta. And any abstentions? All right, thank you, Jennifer. So what was that, 12-3-1? 12-3-1, okay. David, thank you. All right, Mary, continue.
Thank you. All right, so if you guys have had the chance to look at this report, so any other comments on what, are you satisfied with it as is? Would you like me to go over what you commented on, Mr. Lambert?
I would like to present my comment of what you asked for my comments, if you'd like mine.
Certainly.
You asked if there was anything else. The answer is there are probably a lot of things else.
Mr. Lambert, I'm sorry, can you look at me because I have a hard time hearing what you're saying?
Can you hear me any better now?
Yes.
I think it's more the mic than the direction. I need to face the mic if it's going to work. Perhaps my major question on the report is exemplified by a statement that is now in the report that the public's discomfort about the extent to which they're entitled to participate in these meetings can be, according to the report, resolved by the public holding its own meetings. I ask members of this panel if that is really their view. I also was concerned with the statement in the paper entitled Resolution that was circulated with this 0514 version, that's the way it was labeled when it was set out, that the public has a right to observe, but apparently whoever wrote that has the view that it doesn't have the right to say anything. May I please continue, Ms.
Well, I'd like to respond to that in particular.
Well, I'm not finished.
Okay.
I think, thank you, Pine, I will become finished. There was a decision handed down by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court about 2 months ago. And it made very, very clear that the public not only has a right to observe, but it also has a right under the Massachusetts Constitution to speak and to be heard. I suggest that that is a decision that all of us on this panel, and that frankly many other panels throughout the state, should read. That decision also made it abundantly clear that the public cannot be shut off simply because the chair or some other member of the panel doesn't like what a member of the public is saying. That is the background against which we're working. I think we need to recognize that the public's concern is in many ways well-founded. The report recognizes that concern. And I think we all need to recognize that for this panel to have public support and to have credibility demands far more than simply letting people observe.
Mr. Lambert, your comment on that, the resolution, I think you misinterpreted what this comment was. I said the public is allowed, if you look at the regulation and the guidelines, to speak, but it's at the chair's discretion. If the chair says if the chair says that you can have a public comment, you can have a public comment. We listen to the public comments. We know that the public is not happy with the proposals that are on the table. But to say that we're not letting the public comment is wrong on is bending the truth on your part.
I think it is not bending any truth. It clearly presents my opinion, and I think the idea that it is up to the chair whether the public is permitted to speak at all is quite contrary to what the Supreme Judicial Court said less than 3 months ago.
Court decision. Jim, if anything, I have allowed too many people to speak for too long a time at this microphone. I mean, that's the big critique. We haven't lacked allowing people to get up to the microphone and exercise their, constitutional right of free speech. So I don't know where you're going with this, this critique.
I suggest everyone read the decision.
Okay, Mary, continue.
May I just make a comment?
Yes, Mary.
The way it is written, it certainly seems contrary to what we would like this panel to be doing. I would just delete that sentence or sentences that frankly sound insulting to the public. Period. Just get rid of it. Issue solved.
So, so Mrs. Lambert, you're proposing that we delete a sentence out of this current report. Can you tell me what page that is on? Because, I mean, if you know it, I'm trying to find it. It would be nice if you guys had your page numbers.
Okay.
It's at the end. It's on page 20.
Thank you very much.
Paragraph, last sentence.
Awesome. I appreciate that.
And I support what Mary says. I think that's just a little bit of opinion, maybe more.
Mary, could you just read the sentence that we're referring to?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This could be resolved by the public.
So you want me to take out that last sentence, this can be resolved by the public hosting their own meetings? I have no problem with that. Is the board agreed with it?
Yes.
You guys good with it? You guys good with it? That's fine. Consider it struck. All right.
That was easy.
Any other comments, Mr. Lambert?
Continue with yours.
What?
We'll have public comment later on in the meeting, ma'am.
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Mary.
I object to the use of the term processed water as opposed to having the words substituted chemically and radioactively contaminated water. Processed water is a branding term, and I think it does not directly and honestly describe what the public, what the legislature is concerned with. It will have tritium, it will have a amount of chemical and radioactive material. So call a spade a spade. Otherwise, we would not be talking about it. Otherwise, Senator Moran would not have her bill.
Well,
that's what it is. It's not processed water.
Yeah,
That is a euphemism. It's branding. I have actually worked in advertising. I know what the game is. Well, you know what? I think what we all want to do, including you, everyone on the panel, is to follow the dictum that, hey, everybody should get a balanced diet. Calling it processed is not balanced. Holtec has their branding, advertising people, fine. That's their job, but it's not our job.
Okay,
So
Mike.
I would ask,
Go ahead.
I would ask either Mr. Priest or Mr. Pickering, is that terminology inappropriate? does that fall within
This is,
parameters of what is used at the state level?
so Jack Priest, DPH, I think the language that we used in our reporting was untreated wastewater.
Untreated wastewater.
That, I believe, would be a satisfactory resolution to this.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will strike the word processed water and substitute it with untreated wastewater.
Untreated wastewater.
That's correct.
And
Processed water.
That covers both radioactive.
Untreated, pardon me?
Dave Noyes?
Processed water is not untreated wastewater. It is treated wastewater.
What about this? Wastewater containing radioactive and chemical elements that is to be treated.
So the other.
It's a long word, but.
The other language that we had was decommissioning wastewater.
That's fine. I think people would at least understand that language. I think the important thing here to recognize is that we all agree, and the reports that we'll hear more about tonight make clear, that as that water now exists, it clearly includes tritium, it clearly includes radionuclides, and it clearly includes what the EPA refers to as priority pollutants. I think we also all know that that water will be treated, according to Holtec, before it's discharged into Cape Cod Bay, and perhaps before you do anything else with it. Am I right so far?
You are.
I think we need to recognize that treatment, no treatment is perfect. There is no question from a report that I've seen that the treatment will remove probably the vast majority of chemical and radionuclides, though we all know from Dr. Contra that it will not remove tritium. But I think it needs to be understood by the readers of the report that we sort of have a minor apples and oranges here. We have what the water is now, and we have what I expect we will be told it will be at the time, if and when it's released into the bay. But let's not confuse this with processed water, and probably it would be much better not to try to use a single word to describe the water in both of its conditions.
So Dave, is that acceptable as decommissioning wastewater?
I think the problem is that we're trying to differentiate between two different classes of water. One is the water as it currently exists now, and the other is following treatment as it would be proposed to be discharged. And it's important that we distinguish between the two. We're going to spend a lot of time tonight talking about the radionuclide, non-radionuclide concentrations of those volumes on site when they are not representative of what potentially could be discharged.
So Dave, what's your suggestion for the purpose of keeping our discussion of the annual report here finishing sometime tonight?
Why don't we call it processed water potentially containing radionuclides and non-radiological analytes?
Because it will contain.
It's not potential.
Your own expert,
I don't know that.
Tonka, said you would have tritium. It is a radionuclide. Also, Dr. Singh said that to filter it to the highest degree would be too expensive.
That was Mr. Trice, actually.
Okay. It would require very, very expensive equipment, so it wasn't happening. What about radioactive and chemical waste water? It'll have some.
Oh, can I comment on this? The reason why I use processed water is because the water, Dave's correct, it's not in its final state. Hasn't been declared a waste or not. Example, look at your drinking water. Your drinking water contains constituents that are are well below what's allowed for drinking water. You're still drinking water that has chlorides in it, potassium in it, iron in it, not pure water, but they're below regulatory limits. So until Holtec makes that determination that it is a waste, it should still be considered processed water because it is not in its final form.
Yeah, but the definitions in the various laws that we have cited about water going into the bay, the way they define a pollutant.
Water is, I think, an accurate description of what currently is
They define a
existing.
pollutant having radioactive and chemical contaminant.
Contaminated to what levels, though? Contaminated above RCRA levels or contaminated below RCRA levels? That
We don't
makes a
know the
big
levels,
difference.
so why are we playing that game?
And
I'm
Frank-
saying it's branding.
And frankly, the level of it is irrelevant to whether, at least in my view, to whether the laws permit the discharge.
Well, that's your view, sir. Keep that in mind. It's
Oh,
not the regulations.
I'm quite clear that
Folks.
that is in mind, but I fully expect that is a major issue that DEP is going to have to resolve under the direction of both Rebecca Tepper and Bonnie Hype.
Jack?
Gerard, in the settlement agreement and the NIPD's document, how's that water defined for the MPDES application?
How is the water defined?
Yeah, is it defined as decommissioning water?
The unauthorized discharge doesn't allow decommissioning water to be discharged.
So why don't we just work to keep the language the same, so it's the same between the different documents, like the settlement agreement, we've got the MTDS permit, the water quality permit, to use the same language in all of those documents. I think that should be our goal.
So are you proposing that we could call it decommissioning water?
I would suggest the basic question is the one where Dave Noyes and I are in complete agreement, that we're trying to use a single term to talk about two entirely different types of water. And unless that is resolved, this is going to be
So I
and
make a
remain
motion,
confusing.
I make a motion that we define this with the same term that we're using in the application process and in the, lost my train of thought, and with the settlement agreement. So
Okay, and what is
we'll
that?
come back
Yeah.
to you for that
I don't have a copy
correct,
of the
exact
settlement
correct
agreement.
term. I don't have a copy of the settlement agreement in front of me.
Okay. This is not going to just say, if the people agree with us using it, then when you get back to me, we'll substitute that in, and then I'll go out with that change on it. So
Is
that's
that-
fine.
Is that okay, Jim?
What if they say different things?
Well, I guess the basic question, Jack, is, to go back to my basic point, that I think we need to know exactly what is going to be said in any report before it's approved.
So Jim, we're getting ready to do a presentation here later in the meeting to talk about what were the constituents in this
No,
water.
I realize, Jack, I realize that, but my problem at the moment that I adverted to it, well, obviously I have some problems with this report. I obviously will not vote to adopt, approve, or submit anything that is roughly akin to version 0514. But that said, my fundamental problem, as I said at the beginning, is this panel needs to know exactly what it is voting to approve, the majority of the panel. And somehow that has to be accomplished, because you can't rewrite it after it's approved.
But we have a document in front of us that we're currently discussing, and we are going through a few of the finer points right now.
No, and
So if
then
there- if-
certainly you can
So if it got
amend
to the
that
point
document.
tonight where there was a vote, God willing, then the individuals voting on this report would know that 98% of it is in the document that they're looking at, and then there are a few of these minor points that we're kind of working through the list right now.
And I would hope that if there are amendments that people want to make to this document before they vote to approve it, they should be made now, so everyone is clear exactly what they're voting on and what is being approved. The idea that we're going to just put this definitions in sometime later is just frankly not an acceptable way to proceed as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Lambert, I thought that's what we were doing right now. I'm confused.
Well, but the problem, I think we are making amendments right now, and I think that's probably a very good thing. But one of the problems we are running into, and I think Jack Priest adverted to it, is he doesn't have the language right now, so how are we going to get that language in there before there's a vote?
He just said, Jack just said that he was going to research and find out that terminology.
If we,
not
right,
the
so I have a
program,
motion on the floor. I have the
Mr.
motion,
Lambert,
excuse
Mr.
me.
Priest is talking.
I have a motion on the floor that we use the same language for the NPDS application for the annual report, so people aren't confused about what water is this and what water is that.
What is the language?
I second that. Second that.
What language? Is this the?
The same language you're saying in the NIPD's permit, correct?
That's correct.
But not the settlement.
In the NIPD's permit? Or in the
Correct. I said the NIPD's permit.
I second.
So we have a second to Jack Priest's motion, which is to use the terminology that is found in the NIPD's permit to describe this water, correct?
That's correct.
All right, second from Mary Gatzlick. Any discussion on the motion from Mr. Priest?
My only
Recognize
problem,
that the permit, NIPD's permit does not talk about
The NIPD's
radioactive.
permit application.
yeah, NEPD's permit doesn't have radionucleodes in it.
Did you say application?
I said the NIPD's permit application.
Application.
The application.
Missed that.
That's only chemicals, that's half the ball of wax. It doesn't include radionuclides.
Email somebody right
And I think that's the problem.
What's the language in the NIPD's permit?
Any other concerns on the motion by Mr. Priest?
I have it at the office.
I wasn't.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Andrew?
Yeah, I would have concerns about just defaulting to the applicant. You know, if we have something else that's been, you know, in clear use by the group historically, that's fine. The application is solely the creation of the applicant, and I'm not voting for it because I get issues with the application and I don't want to create a sense that there's some tacit approval of how it was characterized. And I don't understand the subtleties of how that might reflect in the characterization of the work that was done by the committee in 2022.
I agree with him. I don't think it's a good solution here.
Jack, were you able to find anything definitive?
We're looking.
I don't think using the application is right.
Mr. Chair, maybe while we're looking at that one, I would propose that we just table it and we come back to it, and let's just keep moving through the report. We can always come back to that one topic.
Okay. Did you want to further research that, Jack, to bring that into the discussion?
So I would like to take that back to the DEP and the DPH, and we have a common phraseology for how this water is being described.
Okay, so you're withdrawing your motion and you'll
I
do.
will draw that motion,
Okay.
and we'll
all
come
right.
back to the chair with the answer.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mary, next.
All right, Mr. Lambert, continue.
In the email, I suggested subjects that needed discussion. The next one probably on the list is the decision to delete in the report the statement that our elected representatives and members of the panel and members of the public have told the panel, that Holtec's proposed discharge would be illegal. That, if there's one thing that was absolutely clear from all the meetings we've sat through, it was that particular message. I am not comfortable with the report that omits that information. I am not comfortable with the report that omits, what to me is a clear fact, that we can argue about it, that what you were told is the public believes that at least 4 state laws prohibit the discharge of Pilgrim's wastewater into Cape Cod Bay. And not having that in the report, to me, is a serious failing.
Would you repeat that last sentence, that for what?
Not having that in the report is a serious failing.
Okay, I believe the report does state that The public is concerned with the discharge into the bay. They're not in favor of the bay. They're concerned with its impact to the marine fisheries. How much clearer do you want to get?
I would like to restore the statement that you removed, that the public told this panel in no uncertain terms, as did our state representatives, that the discharge, in their view, is illegal.
Some people.
And a matter of fact, one of the panel members, Mr. Lambert, a lawyer, gave a very detailed discussion of what these laws were. And so therefore, that took a considerable period of time, and the public still has their old illegal signs.
So the regulations that Mr. Lambert talked about specifically discuss the discharge of wastewater. Again, you and I we've gone back and forth as what is the definition of wastewater. It's water that has constituents above the regulatory limits, all right?
No, not
No.
all right. That is your view.
I
If you're
disagree.
interpreting the statute, I suggest we leave this to DEP and its lawyers, because they're going to have to make the decision.
Then that's fine. So we already stated that the public and the state government is not happy with the discharge.
No,
Right,
no.
you just don't tell them why.
Why? Why? Because it's illegal. Pink
You know
signs.
what? That's, no. You guys are entitled to your opinion.
All right, Jim? Jim, what's next?
Wait, have we resolved that issue? Do you want to add that?
Mr. Lambert, I have a question.
Surely.
For the 40 years of operation of that plant, we discharged in the bay multiple times. How was it legal then and not now?
Settlement agreement.
The basic difference between 40 years ago and now,
Not 40 years, the 40 years of operation.
during the 40 years of
Most-
operation, let's
most
say
recent.
prior to the time the plant shut down, is that the owner of that plant had never agreed to comply with state laws.
Mr. Chairman?
We had the
Chairman?
NRC on that.
So the NRC, I'm not talking about the, I'm not talking about the NRC.
Well, you
I'm
agree,
talking
you
about
understand though, they did
If I
dump
may?
all
Jim.
those years, right?
Jim, Seth Pickering.
So I don't have a copy of the existing 2020 NIPD's permit in front of me, but the reason that Holtec has had to apply for a new application and permit is because it's been determined that in accordance with the existing permit, they cannot discharge the water that's currently in the reactor system. So that's why we're here.
Yeah.
So,
Mr. Chair?
so does that, so
Does that
I
add
get-
clarity to the terminology?
well, I just, that's currently why they're in either a modification or re-permitting scenario.
Andrew?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that the report being amended to include language that makes it clear that some members of the public and some members of the panel asserted that the proposed discharge of wastewater violated state law.
Who was that?
Second.
So we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion on the motion for Mr. Gottlieb? And you want, I don't know, if you want to you want to just, you
Where is it supposed to go?
want to just repeat that, Andrew, one more time for the panel?
Yes, that the report be amended to include a sentence that says, some members of the public, and some members of the panel asserted that the proposed discharge of wastewater would be illegal.
All right. And where I suggest that it would go?
Any other discussion on Andrew's motion?
I believe it probably best fits on page 13 of version 5-14, following the paragraph that begins comments and questions.
Actually, I was going to suggest that it goes on page 12, and the paragraph that says, "Many elected officials and members of the public," start that, then add that comment at the end of that paragraph. That's where it belongs better, I think. Are you good with that?
Sure.
Awesome. Would you please email me those exact words so that we get that?
Mary, I got a call for the vote first.
Okay,
Okay.
sorry.
Any other discussion on Andrew's motion? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? All right. Looks like everyone at the table, so we got 3. Everyone at the table, everyone at home, and I'm assuming Jennifer is going to go. All those against? And Jennifer, you abstaining? I want to. Okay.
Yes, I am.
All right, thank
I'll
you.
be abstaining from everything today, given my lack of context here.
So that was 1501. All right. Jim, you're going to continue. What else you got?
Given the fact that this panel has already made clear that unless something was a subject specifically discussed by the panel members pursuant to an agenda item, it doesn't belong in this report, even though the report itself says that we considered all of these types of things. I don't find it worthwhile to take up another, heaven knows how many more minutes of this panel's time going through the amendments I'm quite clear should be made. I will sit back and wait and see what report is finally recommended to be approved.
So
Do you have anything else to add, Mary?
I just have a question.
Okay.
Today, are we going to vote to approve this report with the changes that we just discussed or not? Because for me,
Well,
I make the motion that we approve the report with the changes that we have so far.
And no other changes?
And no other changes.
okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Dave Nichols. The initial motion was made by Vice Chair Pine Dubois. Okay.
Out of a sense of obligation.
I want you to clarify the motion that you just made, and then we're going to go into discussion.
That the changes that have been adopted so far by the panel tonight and as stated by Mary Gatzlick and read patiently by her and discussed with Jim Lampert, that those changes be adopted and included in the report, including the one most recently by the IWG on the water, and that we adopt the report and submit it to the governor with those changes.
With no other changes.
With no
to the
other
document.
changes.
No, just a minute. With no other changes.
You're making my motion for me?
No, I'm just trying to clarify, and I understand this to mean with no other changes to the document as circulated to us.
all right,
Yes, I think, Jim, that is an accurate statement.
I would like a point of clarification. If we find spelling errors, we can correct those, correct, Mr. Lambert?
No.
See, that's
Sure
what I
you
figured.
can. That's not true, Mr. Lambert. Come on, there's always provisions to allow
if she's-
typographical errors and errors in transcription, et cetera.
As long as-
Applies this panel to approving something and then fixing a typographical error. That's silly. And it keeps this report from getting distributed to the public and getting the information out there, which is what this panel should be focused on, and not whether we correct a typo.
All right,
I will withdraw that comment. I wait to see what the report looks like.
okay, any other discussion on the motion?
Well, Pine, do you want to make a little revision that this would also allow for correction of typos?
Okay, let's not get ridiculous. You're making like a point here. You're not even talking about what the public should know and not know.
Excuse me, please. Excuse me.
Ma'am,
Yes, Mary.
We're trying to get this report done, and Mr. Lambert,
Mary.
go ahead.
Mary,
I will
let's bring it
withdraw
back.
my objection to correction of punctuation and other typographical spelling errors.
Okay, all right, thank you, Jim.
Change the meaning because punctuation and spelling
Any other discussion from the panel on the original motion?
I hope that would be understood.
Any other discussion on the original motion? All right, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion?
Of approving this tonight.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right, looks like we have 11. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3. Andrew, you opposed?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm going to abstain. I was not on the commission prior to its final meeting. I don't feel like it's appropriate for me to weigh in on what was said or not said in the 11 months of the year that I was not a member.
Okay, Andrew, thank you.
How gracious of you, Mr. Hooker.
So then there's 2 abstentions. Okay, you got the count?
11, 3, 1.
No, 2. Andrew and Jennifer.
Oh, two,
Abstentions,
two,
Andrew
oh,
and
okay,
Jennifer.
two, but- okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, moving on to the next agenda item.
Get outta here.
We've got a presentation, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute Sea Grant Study on potential path or proposed. Yes, ma'am.
Earlier this evening,
No.
you told me that I would have an opportunity to.
Later.
Yep, public comment is coming up on the agenda, and you're going to be second.
After the vote, what value does that offer?
Incredible value,
You're out of order.
yes.
You gonna change the vote after the public speaks?
No,
Well, then there's no value to it.
it does.
So.
Okay,
Matt-
Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute on the
So your
potential.
ignorance of the public is absolutely.
On potential path or proposed wastewater release from the Plymouth Nuclear Power Station to Cape Cod Bay. So from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, we have Matthew Charette and
And-
Irina Rapina.
Yes,
Are they both remote?
yes, they're both remote on the screen. They're on the
All right,
screen.
I don't know if I got the pronunciation of your name right. I apologize for that. I know Matthew, I think I got that one pretty good, but could you just state both of your names and
Sorry.
how you got involved in this?
Sure, I'm going to introduce Irina. So if everyone can hear me okay, good evening. My name is Matt Charette, and I'm a senior scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and director of the WHOI Sea Grant Program, which is the program that's overseeing this new study. So in addition to leading the Sea Grant Program, I'm an oceanographer with over 25 years of experience studying radioactivity in ocean and groundwater environments. I want to start off by thanking the National Sea Grant Office for providing rapid response funding for this much needed study on the potential path of the proposed wastewater release from Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station into Cape Cod Bay. I'd like to also acknowledge the Massachusetts congressional delegation, in particular Senators Markey and Warren, as well as Congressman Keating for their support of Sea Grant and our mission, and to WHOI for providing the required cost share funding that helped enable this study. I'm sure everyone here appreciates the fact that the Bay hosts a diverse and productive marine ecosystem, and that it's the site of many commercial and recreational fishing and aquaculture enterprises, as well as a thriving tourism economy. All of these aspects of the Massachusetts blue economy depend critically on water quality in the Bay. So what do we expect to gain from this study? We anticipate that it will provide essential information to regulators about where Cape Cod Bay surface water travels, how long the water resides in the Bay, and the seasonal and other drivers that affect water movement as they consider any permit request to release radioactive water into the Bay. And before I turn it over to Dr. Rapina, I want to note that because the amounts and types of radionuclides in the Pilgrim wastewater are not yet known, although I understand that they will be released later in this meeting tonight. Any firm conclusions about the health and safety of humans or marine organisms that might result from a release of radioactive wastewater into the Bay are beyond the scope of this particular study. So with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to our project lead, Dr. Irina Rapina from WHOI's Physical Oceanography Department, who will give you a brief recap of prior work on Bay circulation, followed by a summary of this WHOI Sea Grant funded study. So over to you, Irina.
Thank you very much. I'll share my screen. Do you see my screen? Can you hear me and can you see my screen?
Looks good, Irene.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so before I start, I wanted to introduce my collaborators on this project. These are Alison McDonald, Sachiko Yoshida, and Ken Busler from Hui. I would like to start with a very brief overview of our prior work on this topic and one piece of research that we have recently completed and published is a drifter-based study that used all available trajectories of drifting buoys in and around the bay. There is a total of approximately 400 trajectories available. Based on this available drifter tracks, we have applied different statistical techniques in order to look at the spreading pathways in and around the Cape Cod Bay. And the first result that the drifters provided is a picture of the mean currents in the area. The current comes towards the bay from the north, and as it approaches Cape Cod, it splits into branches. The offshore branch turns offshore, hugs the tip of the Cape Cod, and flows southward along the outer shelf of the Cape. And then the remainder of the currents proceeds into the bay. As it penetrates into the bay, strips of water peel off this main current, curve towards the race point and merge with the offshore branch. And then the remainder proceeds even further into the bay. So as this waters penetrate further and further, the current slows down and the flow in the eastern part of the bay is very slow. Of course, this is just a picture of the mean currents, and this patterns, this flow can be changed and even reversed by time-dependent influences from tides, winds, atmospheric forcing, and remote features, for example, different ocean eddies that can be produced elsewhere, but then pass through this area. And so to account for all of this time-dependent effects, we have applied a statistical technique to the same drifter data set, and we have produced a probabilistic map that shows the most likely pathways. So the map on the left is a probability that a drifter or a water parcel that was released close to the Pilgrim will visit different locations throughout the domain. And the probability is color-coded, with yellow denoting higher probabilities and blue denoting lower probabilities. So what we see on this map is that there are 3 likely pathways for this wastewater plume. The southward pathway takes the plume or part of the plume southward into the bay, where it will spend at least 2 to 3 weeks. The eastward pathway takes part of the plume towards the tip of Cape Cod, towards Race Point, where the water would curve around, merge with the offshore branch, and get advected southward along the outer shelf. And then the third pathway initially leads northward, but after about a day, this part of the plume will take an abrupt turn to the south, head towards the Race Point again, and merge with the offshore branch following the outer shelf. So this is useful information, but there are a lot of open questions that the drifters cannot address. And specifically, using the the same technique using the same existing drifter data set, we cannot look at the temporal changes in the circulation and transport. And we can also we cannot explore the physical causes of this temporal variability. And so this two questions, temporal variability and physical causes, would be the main questions for the proposed study. We will focus on exploring seasonal changes and specifically looking at the role of wind, because we think that wind is very important in setting the transport and the circulation. So the proposed research will use a high-resolution state-of-the-art ocean circulation model. And in this model, we can recompute the statistical maps, such as the one I just showed, for different seasons and different years. We can investigate whether the different maps for different seasons look similar or different. And we can also look at the role of wind as a dominant driver of those changes. And finally, because the bay is home for many aquaculture sites, as part of this proposed work, we plan to provide information on where and when the plume is expected to pass through major aquaculture sites. So just a few preliminary results from the model. This one just shows introduces the model that we will be using. This is a high resolution Gulf of Maine operational forecast system, GOMOFS, which is run by NOAA. And we have already started looking at the model output, and this slide presents some model validation or comparison between the model predicted trajectories of drifting buoys and the observed trajectories of drifting buoys. In short, the comparison looks pretty favorable. So the model seems to be representative of the real ocean. And then finally, this is my last slide. This is some preliminary model-based results for the seasonal changes in transport for the year 2019. The four maps on top of the page show most likely pathways maps of the same type I described before in the talk, computed for 4 different seasons: winter, spring, summer, and fall. Again, probability, what is shown is probability that a parcel released close to Pilgrim will visit different locations throughout the domain. Red indicates higher probability, blue indicates lower probability. And if we compare left to right, we can see very different patterns, very different transport patterns between winter and fall versus spring and summer, where in winter and fall, there is virtually no transport out of the bay. And during spring and summer, there is some transport, and all of this transport happens through a narrow channel just north of Provincetown. So what causes these changes? And one obvious candidate for being the dominant driver is wind. And so as a preliminary results, I wanted to show you wind roses. This is a diagram that shows the direction and strength of the wind for the same 4 seasons of the same year, 2019. And from this preliminary results, it looks like the wind is very important, and the wind patterns indeed are very different for spring and summer versus fall and winter. So this is where we are now. We want to see whether the changes between winter, fall versus spring and summer are robust and hold for other years, or whether 2019 was special. And we will explore the role of wind as a driver in more detail. More research to come, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Matt and Irina.
I have one question, John.
James Lampert, question.
In one of your, about three back in one of your slides, you mentioned aquaculture areas. One of the major aquaculture areas, as we all know, is in the elbow down near Wellfleet. Is the scope of your report going to include Duxbury, Plymouth, and Kingston Bay that are also major aquaculture areas? I know, for example, that something like 77 million oyster seedlings are planted in Duxbury Bay every year. Will those three bays be included in your study?
We will try to include, yes, we will try to include it. What we would like to provide is the information on what is the likelihood that the plume would visit the site, and also the timeline when it would visit the site, when would it pass through the aquaculture site after the release. And yes, we will try to include all of the major aquaculture sites around the bay.
Thank you.
Fine.
So, Irina, thank you very much. I'm glad we're going to studying. That's a good thing. I'm wondering if your study has any bearing on the velocity of a discharge. So I'm assuming that you're talking about mapping a discharge from Pilgrim, and that's the reason for the coloration in some of your slides. Do you have, is there any capacity in your study to look at variable quantity or volume of discharge? Would that be part of it or not? And I have another follow-up question to that.
Yes, in all of the maps that I showed so far, we use the point discharge, not the prolonged discharge. We can try looking at different types of discharges, but within the resolution of the model has limited spatial and temporal resolution. And so all of the results that we can get are as good as the model is. So, making the discharge longer or shorter by a few hours would not reflect in my model simulations. But we can certainly look at, much longer discharges that would take, days to weeks, and what the effects would be.
Yeah, I think that some of the question is, I don't know where the original model comes from. Was the model developed in Cape Cod Bay, or is this kind of a worldwide model of flow?
No, this is a regional model, and the model is run by NOAA.
I know that I spoke to you about it possibly including tidal influence, since our tidal exchange during the day is so great. I mean, we have a 10-foot range of tide here twice a day, as opposed to south of the Cape is 2 feet, twice a day. So that to me impacts it. And the other one question I have, and I don't know how you would consider it, or whether it's already a model and known, is the discharge from Deer Island, which points straight in our direction and is probably carried by all that current. Do you have any capacity to give us some information on that, since I think there's a lot of value in the model that you're doing beyond just our current discussion. I just wonder if that's part of it.
Right. So with regards to tides, the model has tides as one of the drivers, but again, the resolution of the model is, we have output from the model every 6 hours. So we only get kind of combined long-term effects of tides on our simulated plume trajectory, rather than localized effects of tides that would tell us how exactly the plume would behave close to Pilgrim. So the model is adequate for the first question, but is not adequate for resolving the details on smaller scales and smaller times.
Right.
And
then has it done any research into the, the impact of the Deer Island discharge?
No, we have not looked at it.
Thank you.
Mary?
Yes, some of the public has mentioned Stellwagen Bank, 6 miles off Cape Cod. Will you be looking at potential plume in that direction? Or is it just hooking around Provincetown and going on the outer side of Cape Cod Bay?
The model domain does include it.
Does include it, okay.
So yes, the maps that we plan to produce will have that region too.
Thank you very much.
Mary Gaslick?
I have a quick question. I'm looking at your maps. Is the current direction in the bay mostly counterclockwise?
In the mean, yes.
Ever go the opposite direction?
It's what is shown on the diagram.
So those two that hug the closer, they never switch directions, they're always in the same to shore, and then the middle one.
This one?
Yep, that one, and the other one that's very close to Cape Cod, or close to Pilgrim.
Right, so first of all, this is the mean currents diagram, right? So this is how the currents look on average. At any instance, the current can be very different and currents can reverse as well. But in the mean, this is how the circulation looks like in general. And what is shown is that as the flow comes towards the bay, the offshore branch of the current doesn't get into the bay. It comes close to the race point and then flows along the outer shelf. That's what's represented by this outermost blue arrow. And then this middle part is the water that starts going into the bay, but then turns towards the race point and then merges with the offshore branch. So this can be continued to go southward.
And the current that hugs the coastline,
Here.
does that water always stay in the bay, or does that eventually make its way out and into the other currents?
So the water that gets into the bay, in our maps, spans at least 2 to 3 weeks in the bay. That's what is shown in the my most likely pathway maps, and the corresponding travel time map, which shows how long does it take for the water parcel to travel from Pilgrim to certain locations. So the southern part of the plume, this yellow blob in my map, spans at least 2 to 3 weeks in the bay, and the drifter lifetime is not long enough to tell how long past 3 weeks it will stay there. But with the model, we should be able to answer it better.
I'm missing the point. So after 2 to 3 weeks, what happens to the water?
We don't know because the drifters do not
I heard that
provide
right.
information for longer than 3 weeks. That's
Thank you very
part of the research to come.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the clarification.
Any other questions? Dave Noyes.
If I could, I'm just curious as to whether your research is informed by what the plant has proposed. for discharge flow rates and volumes for approximately 3,000 gallons per minute and a 20,000 gallon discharge, 1 per day, no more than 3 per week?
Yeah, the maps as they are right now, to show the probability can be scaled to, can be converted to concentrations if you know the input concentration. But we haven't done it so far.
Would seem most useful to align it with what is proposed in the permit amendment. So that way it would approximate the, or actually would use the actual conditions associated with a discharge. Just a recommendation.
So first, we need to know the input concentrations to do the conversion from probability to concentration. And so far, we don't know what's in the water and which concentrations. But
yeah, the concentrations would be one piece, but the velocity associated with the volumetric flow rate and the duration of the release, I'm sure, are important as well, right?
Yes, they are. It's this is a question that was similar to the one that was asked before about, you know, whether for point release, that's what the maps were constructed for, whether these maps would be different for a prolonged release. And again, we can answer this question to some degree if we talk about, you know, a release that would last at least days to weeks. But we cannot talk about whether doing a release that takes a few hours would produce a different picture from what is shown here. Just again, this is because of the limitations of the numerical model that we're using.
So if I understood you correctly, the model would not support, say, a 5 to 6 hour release that occurred, a prolonged release over that period of time, and then no further release for multiple days. Is that right?
It will treat it as a point release because the resolution of the model is 6 hours. So that would happen during one time interval in the model. The model would not distinguish or would not depict correctly the distinguish two releases, one which has all the water released at once and one that has water released within a couple of hours.
Does the model differentiate between whether the release is on an incoming tide into, say, Plymouth, Kingston, Duxbury Bay, because, as Pine mentioned, we've got a lot of tidal flow there, or on an outgoing tide, but just looking at it, it strikes me as going to make quite a difference, particularly in the inner bays?
It does to some degree. Again, the model has tides as a driver, as a forcing. So the currents that the model produce include tidal currents. But again, the resolution of the model is 6 hours, which means that the model correctly depicts influences of those tidal currents on much longer scales, but it will not give good predictions for what happens locally on very small scales and times.
Any other questions for Matthew and Irina?
Mr. Chair?
Who's that, Andrew? Andrew?
Yeah, it's not so much a question, but kind of a comment. And I guess the comment is that, and this is not Sea Grant's problem, but from the perspective of, you know, making a regulatory decision on the state permit side, I think ultimately the results are largely irrelevant because plain letter reading of the law says no discharge. And so I think I'm fascinated by the work. I think it's enormously helpful to have better understanding of what the flow within that bay is for a multitude of reasons. But these results shouldn't be neither determinative nor should the agency feel the need to wait for this work to be completed to reject the application as illegal under the Sanctuaries Act.
Okay, thank you. Anyone with any other questions for the presenters? Okay, you can clear the screen if you will. And we thank you for showing up tonight. I appreciate your excellent presentation.
Can I, just one clarification, sorry, John.
Go ahead, Mike.
You're going to start in July, is that what you said in your release? It's going to be a year-long study?
Yes, the study will start in July, and the results will be released within a year, by the end of the year.
So can we invite you back when you find interesting things to tell us?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much, you two.
Thank you for your time.
All right, you're welcome. All right, next on the agenda, Dave Noyes, Holtec, HDI Pilgrim decommissioning update.
All right, our presentation starts with the waterfall chart, and one of the significant changes to the waterfall chart that you may or may not notice is that the partial site release that had originally been scheduled for 2027 is now scheduled for 2031, and I'll go into some of the drivers for that. And how we got there. I'll also, as part of this presentation, discuss the ongoing effort for building demolition and waste management at the site. So the 4-year delay in the partial site release is driven by a 4-year delay in reactor vessel segmentation and ensuing reactor building demolition. The drivers for that were specifically preserving the decommissioning trust fund growth by flattening cost curves. What that means is that the decommissioning trust fund did not grow at a rate compared to the costs of performing decommissioning due to increased costs of labor and high inflationary costs. And as a result of that, in order to be able to continue to regrow the decommissioning trust fund and ensure that we have the proper amount of margin to be able to complete the job, we're putting a 4-year hold on this key portion of the demolition activities. This is still considered to be a prompt decommissioning model. This is not a 60-year safe store, so we are still committed to moving ahead with performing this. This is not a situation that, that isn't irreversible. If the decommissioning trust fund growth does well in advance of what we have anticipated, we could very well pull that schedule back in the coming years. One of the other key drivers is part of reactor vessel pressure vessel segmentation. So the options associated with that, there are a significant amount of industry lessons learned with respect to innovative tooling. So the reactor vessel is a 6-inch thick carbon steel vessel, very large, and its segmentation requires very intricate tooling. The industry has innovated over the course of the last couple of vessel segmentations, which gives us the opportunity to further innovate and create tooling that can perform this work more efficiently and with less radiological dose for the individual workers that will be performing the activity. So that's one of the key drivers. Also, the uncertainty associated with the NEPDs and service water discharge permit modifications was also a consideration in that assessment. But again, this is not something that, that is not irreversible. If we do find that the decommissioning trust fund growth grows at a higher rate than what we anticipate, we could very well bring this in.
Dave, could you just review
Sure.
what is partial? Definition of partial site release.
Partial site release is meeting all of the environmental standards for the entire property with the exception of the ISFC. So the dry cask storage area itself remains as an island where radioactive material is stored, and the remainder of the site is restored to the state and federal requirements.
And at that point, upon completion of that, that is when potentially Holtec and the community, or Holtec in the private sector, could talk about either purchasing the land or developing an economic development or reopening it to the public, et cetera.
That's when it would be available to do that. We suggest that we be talking about that as early as possible.
Right, okay.
To be able to make that happen. As far as ongoing activities for demolition, we have, since our last meeting, demolished 3 significant structures on site. The old main gate building is in the upper portion of the picture. The trash compaction facility had within it on-site storage casks. Those casks were housed within a concrete wall, and we removed that wall and also rubblized the concrete associated with those on-site storage containers. The ones that were not radiologically contaminated, the ones that were, we will retain and use those for our radiological shipments. We also demolished the central alarm station building, which was the primary security building for the site, and a smaller outbuilding called the Safety Enhancement Program diesel building. So significant demolition activities within the last couple of months. So the profile in red shows the buildings that have been demolished and removed. The ones that are, the one that is in yellow, kind of in the middle left, is the security diesel generator enclosure. That is currently in the process of having asbestos material abated within that enclosure, and then we'll remove the remainder of that. Next up is the station blackout diesel generator, which is the green building that is adjacent to that middle left. And then going forward, we have 2 underground storage tanks that remain for our heating boilers. Those are in the upper left-hand corner. And then there are 4 above-ground storage tanks, a firewater storage tank, 2 condensate storage tanks, and demineralized water storage tank. All of those that are in the green and yellow are slated to be completed before the fall of this year. So we talked about the security diesel generator. That is the top building that you see there, the asbestos abatement. We had on-site inspection by the Mass DEP today, and the abatement is scheduled to be completed by the 25th of May, with demolition to be completed by the first week in June. Station blackout diesel generator demolition is slated to be completed by the end of June, and again, those above-ground tanks to be removed by September of this year. So just kind of honing in on environmental focus associated with demolition. So this is the left-hand picture was that trash compaction facility, which was an area that processed for both shipping and receiving radiological material. So that building, when we commenced decommissioning of it, there were some surfaces within that building that were radiologically contaminated. So we could have approached that by saying, we're just going to take that large portion of the building, we're going to treat it as radiological waste, and then we're going to ship that for burial. There are means to be able to remove coatings on the inside of concrete walls called scabbling. So we're able to use scabbling to reduce the amount of radiological material that was needed to be treated for burial. We were also able to recycle and reuse a significant portion of the material, either as clean fill or as scrap metal. So you can see about 60% of the waste associated with the building that was non-radiological was sent to recycle or reuse. And we reduced the radioactive waste portion to about 5,000 cubic feet. So part of the commitment when we enter into these demolition activities is to attempt to reuse or recycle the maximum amount of material as possible and to minimize the amount of material that has to go to disposal, particularly radiological disposal. We continue on with work associated with segmenting the internal portions of the reactor vessel. The lower picture is the lower core plate, which was the portion of the reactor vessel that supported the fuel assemblies within the reactor. So that was cut free of the reactor vessel underwater, and then that core plate is moved up and then transported into a primary support stand where it is segmented into pieces that are suitable to be packaged as Class B or C radioactive waste. That packaging occurs by removing the water from the material, and then the waste package is staged in an on-site storage area on-site, pending Holtec's licensing approval for a transport cask that will allow us to be able to transport that material to its final disposal in Andrews, Texas. And with respect to waste management, other than the B and C waste management, which we currently do not have a cask that will allow us to be able to ship that off-site, our Class A waste, which is the lowest class of radioactive waste, is being shipped essentially as it's being created. So to date, we have shipped just under 50,000 cubic feet of Class A waste, and that is either transported on the back of flatbeds, as you see it, directly to Texas, or it's sent to either Worcester or to Mansfield, where it's loaded onto rail and then transported to Texas via rail. Within this time period, we submitted our annual radiological release and radiological effluent operating reports. So every year we assess how much radiological dose is associated with the decommissioning activities at the plant. That involves, since we haven't made any kind of liquid effluent release, it involves what's called ambient radiation. This is radiation that could be received by an individual at the site property, at the edge of the site property, specifically Rocky Hill Road. And it includes gaseous effluent, the deposition of gaseous effluent, both directly onto an individual as it would appear as dose, but also as its potential to enter the food chain as well. So the ambient radiation accounted for 0.16 millirem per year for calendar year 2022. The gaseous effluent radiation to the most maximally exposed individual member of the public was 68 hundred thousandths of a millirem for the calendar year, yielding a total of 6.16 millirem for the year. And to be able to equate that to radiological dose associated with both background and man-made sources, we receive approximately 625 millirem per year from natural and man-made sources. For water management, we did complete split sampling with the state. That was performed on April 5th and observed by the Town of Plymouth Director of Marine and Environmental Affairs. And our results, our portions of the split sample, were consistent with the concentrations and the constituents, the analytes, with information that we've previously provided to this panel. And that ends the report pending questions.
One question, Dave.
James?
You referred to the transfer casts, and what I understood is that you're presently seeking approval for a transport cast design. Is that at the NRC? Could you just expand on that a little?
It is the NRC's design. We have not yet submitted that design. We've gone through a couple of iterations, but we're in the process of finalizing the design, and that will be submitted for the NRC's approval.
Do you have any rough estimate as to when a transport cask might be approved?
Yeah, our goal is to have one in place within approximately a year.
Thank you.
Dave Nichols and then
Dave.
Andrew.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dave, thanks for the report. I want to go back to the comments you made about the 4-year delay, and part of that being I guess, the lack of growth of the decommissioning trust fund. Does that imply that you don't currently have enough money to complete the decommissioning and you're relying on kind of market conditions to make up the difference?
No, that's not what that means at all. In fact, under the state agreement, the state looked at the amount of money that would be available at partial site release and set specific triggers based on the growth of the decommissioning trust fund, and we haven't reached any of those triggers yet. So this is not a point at which we have to stop all work. This is about ensuring that we maintain the proper margins for potential unknowns that may come up in the future.
Okay, so is there a growth rate percentage that you're anticipating for the trust fund?
I'm sure there is among the financial analysts. I don't know what that is. But the financial analysts, the key numbers are that growth versus labor costs, the growth versus cost of actually completing the demolition activities.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're not kind of dependent on a 4% growth in order to finish this product. And when you can't predict what the market's going to do and how that money's going to grow, I mean, it could go backwards, I suppose, right? If you're investing it somewhere, you could actually lose money.
Right, and that's why it makes sense for us to take this 4-year pause and not proceed ahead and drive down this pathway without knowing how those economic conditions are going to change in the short to moderate term.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew?
Hey, Dave, can I just have one question too?
Yes.
All right, Mike, go
So,
ahead.
when you're done with, would it be just the reactor building and turbine building and one administration building, and that would be left at the end of this year?
Pretty much. There's an augmented off-gas building. The screen house will still be part of the process building will still exist. I think that's about it for the structures that will remain on site. Turbine building, augmented off-gas, screen house, and the administration building.
And so the water that you're using now, obviously, to do segmentation for your shielding, so where will all that water that's in the fuel pool now in the reactor separator pit, will it all be put in the Taurus, or where will the water go?
Yes, it will. So as we're done using the water for segmentation of the reactor parts, that water can be drained to the Taurus. When we're done packaging the waste, then the spent fuel pool can be drained to the Taurus.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, a bunch of things, Mr. Chair, thank you. So, just picking up on that, Dave, what's the, there's been, in my time now with the committee, your use of this water, or the end of your use of this water, has been a moving target going later. Given the 4-year proposal for delay, does that impact when you would no longer have use for this water?
No, that's pretty much unchanged. The critical path activities for the water in the reactor cavity and the water in the spent fuel pool remain unchanged. the very small, limited portion of the water that is in the reactor vessel proper, the reactor vessel itself, that water may or may not be able to be made available, depending on fixatives and other things that we could use to be able to control contamination. So as of this time, we're weighing options on whether that work activity, the segmentation of the reactor vessel in that 4-year pause would be a wet evolution, or whether that's dry with a fixative applied.
So what is the current working date for completion of utilization of that water, the 1.1 million, or the bulk?
The current would be the end of this year.
Okay. So I want to ask a little bit about the pending application. It's currently for about 1.1 million gallons of effluent, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And then I thought I heard you say when we were talking, when you addressed the questions about the modeling to the Sea Grant folks, that it was going to be released in 20,000 gallon batches. Is that right too?
It's less than 20,000. It's limited by the capacity of an individual treated water tank, approximately 18,500 gallons.
Okay. And is it going to be mixed with additional water on its way out?
It will. It will be diluted with salt service water at 3,000 gallons per minute.
So what do you think the total volume discharged on your daily events would be?
It'd probably be, I don't know, 18,000, 180,000, let me see, 3,000 times 60. And do the math, it would be 3,000 gallons per minute times approximately 60 minutes in an hour times 5 hours for a discharge, plus 18,500 gallons.
Okay, so is it not fair to say then that the daily discharge is the product of that mathematical equation and not 18,500 gallons a day?
No, it's not fair to say that, because that water is just throughput water that's recognized in the current permit as being able to be used for dilution. So the only thing that is being permitted is the discharge of the radiological effluent through the new outfall 15, which is 18,500 gallons per day.
And it just so happens that the MIPA threshold for filing an E&F and going through the environmental review process is 20,000 gallons a day. So, I mean, isn't it fair to think of both the permitted volume as the activity for which you're seeking a permit, not 61 discrete 18,500 gallon discharges?
I would say no. I would say
one permit application. You filed one for 1.1 million gallons a day. That is right.
we did file one. That's correct. Under those conditions of 18,500 gallons discharge, plus the 3,000 gallon per minute salt service water system that operates anyway to be used as dilution water.
Okay. My last issue that I want to bring up is when we met with you on the 27th of March, you showed us the waterfall schedule, and I believe stated that basically the same as what we had seen prior. And then within 3 business days after that, company made a filing with the NRC, perhaps even sooner than 3 days, but it's dated the 31st of March. We met on the 27th. In the 31st of March report, all the changes that you articulated to start your commentary tonight were laid out in that report. And speaking for myself, as a member of this commission, it felt like we were misled, that nothing was changing on the 27th when 4 years were tacked on, and that could not have been come up with, written, and reported starting the morning of the 28th. And it just, it troubles me greatly that we made these assurances, and, we were given an assurance about a schedule. Could have been said, we're going to file a report that's going to have some modifications to schedule. We'll let you know what they are at the next meeting. That didn't happen. We were led to believe, leaving that March meeting, that everything was the same as what was presented, when it was clearly known by Holtec that it was not. And I would just say, speaking for myself only, the best way, the most benign way that I can characterize how that made me feel was being misled. And there are other worse ways to characterize it. And it just, it makes me wonder what other shoes are being discussed that have not fallen that we didn't hear about tonight. And I find it very troubling.
The schedule for the decommissioning fund is being continuously assessed. That information was not finalized on the 27th, or it would have been provided to the NRC by regulation prior to the 31st. So we were still analyzing and evaluating what those numbers were being, and establishing the cash flow. These numbers may change again. These are something that by regulation requires us to continually reassess and to report to the NRC whenever there are changes.
Okay, but 3 days after, no more than 3 days after you present it to us, you significantly change the playing field. I get it, things change, but to come to, I'm just telling you, to come to us and make a presentation with no hint that there's anything in the works, erodes your credibility. At least it does with me.
Mr. Chairman?
Seth?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So, Dave, with the 4-year delay in the new reactor segmentation schedule, what's the new schedule for the final disposition of the decommissioning, dewatering? It's kind of the same question that Andrew asked, but it's not the same. What is the schedule?
It depends on the ability to be able to drain the reactor vessel. So the reactor vessel volume is probably about 5,000 to 6,000 gallons. So that will either have to remain full of water until we're ready to segment, or we'll create a way of being able to drain the reactor vessel and provide fixative to prevent the spread of radiological contamination. And we have not devised what that final schedule looks like yet.
Okay, so there will be a new reactor segmentation schedule, but you don't know exactly what it's going to be yet.
I know what the reactor segmentation schedule is going to be. I know it's going to be 4 years out. I don't know whether it's going to affect 5,000 gallons of water or not.
I think that segmentation might be confusing some panel members. So when you're talking about the current segmentation project that's going on now, that's the internals of the reactor vessel.
That's the inside of the can.
And this 4-year extension would be the can itself that's being taken apart. Thank you.
That's correct.
Henrietta?
Yes. This is not so much a question as a comment, going back to Andrew's comment, which is that your surprise, Andrew, at the sudden new information just 3 days after your meeting with Holtec is strangely reminiscent of the surprise that we experienced when, after the November meeting of the NDCAP in 2021, at which you or Pat told us that all options were very much still under consideration. That happened in November, late November of 2021, and it was about a week later that Representative Keating got a letter from the NRC confirming that the NRC, that Holtec would commence dumping water in the first quarter of 2022. It was a similar kind of, wait a minute, we just heard one thing and now here's an entirely different thing. My point is that the manipulation of timing, the withholding of information until a certain time is a strategy, an anti-transparency strategy. The manipulation of language, calling water that's highly contaminated processed water. The manipulation of language, calling discharge what we know is dumping. These are some of the reasons why you may find it hard to convince us, why we are finding a very hard time with trust. Trust is not there. We don't mean to be disrespectful, but we need transparency, honesty, and straight language.
All right, last question for Mr. Noyes from Mary Lampert.
Yes. The delay in schedule, what does this mean for a reduction of worker staff?
I'm not sure. We haven't done labor curves. We'll continue to do some work on site, and we'll keep the labor force that's necessary to be able to do that work.
Chair, can I have one last follow-up question?
Go ahead, Andrew.
In evaluating, Dave, in evaluating the various risk factors associated with the balance in the fund, given that we all know labor costs, material costs are variable and obviously up right now, was the end balance walkaway profit margin something that was a variability, or was that held fixed and you backed into what the expense rate needed to be over a extended period of time in order to preserve the targeted return on the investment for the company?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a financial analyst. I don't know how exactly that specific value was calculated.
Well, I would, if you would, convey that question to whoever can answer it. I'd be interested in either an offline answer or the ability to discuss that later, because it strikes me that the town of Plymouth, by being asked to live with this for additional 4 years, and then all the risks associated with that extended to the general public, we're being asked to, I highly suspect the public's being asked to assume the risk and hold Holtec financially harmless till you get market conditions that work to your advantage. I don't think that's the way it should be.
The first and most important job is to make sure that there's adequate money to be able to complete the job that we started, and we're not going to shortcut that.
I understand that, but if you're taking $100 or $200 million off the table at the end as return on your time, then that's money that can't go to fulfilling that valid public purpose. So I'd like to understand how you're viewing that bottom line walk away number in influencing how and when you do what you do over what period of time, because it's materially relevant to everybody in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that get done in a timely and efficient manner, and how much money you walk away with is a significantly less concern to most of us.
Thank you, Mr. Noyes. You all set?
I am.
Okay, now I think we're moving on to the highlight of the evening, and that's Mr. Seth Pickering with the IWG report.
Mr. Chairman, members of the panel, this is my update for this NDCAP meeting. I'd like to welcome two new interagency work group members, Jonathan Goldberg, who's a permanent designee for the DPU chair, and Jennifer Robertson, who will be the designee for the Secretary of EOHHHS. My first item here is the water discharge. Mass DEP and the Department of Public Health have completed analysis of the split samples of decommissioning water as previously described to the NDCAP. The results were made public earlier today to press, legislators, and key stakeholders, and I will be summarizing them shortly. As a reminder, the split sampling was undertaken at the request of the NDCAP and citizens to provide a baseline characterization of the decommissioning water and to provide independent verification of sampling conducted by Holtec. The sampling is not a regulatory requirement and was not required as part of the NPDES permit or the surface water discharge permit modification applications recently submitted by Holtec to the US EPA and Mass DEP. On April 5th, 2023, representatives from Mass DEP and the Department of Public Health met with Holtec at the Pilgrim Station to collect samples, which were taken from three separate locations: the spent fuel pool, the dryer separator pit, and the Taurus. Workers authorized to operate the plant systems and equipment took the samples. The samples were taken by Holtec personnel under the direct observation of representatives of the Department of Public Health, Mass DEP, and the town of Plymouth. The samples later were transferred to the appropriate shipping sample containers by Mass DEP personnel and delivered by a DPH contracted shipper to Gel Laboratories in South Carolina to be analyzed for non-radiological pollutants. The Department of Public Health samples were delivered to the Massachusetts Environmental Radiation Laboratory, located at the Massachusetts State Public Health Laboratory, to analyze for radiological pollutants. In total, 22 of the 239 non-radiological parameters that were analyzed were detected above the method detection limit, including some estimated values in at least one of the three samples. 4 radiological parameters were detected, including tritium. Both Mass DEP and Department of Public Health subsequently received from Holtec a list of the detected parameters from Holtec's analysis. The analytical results for the samples collected by Mass DEP and DPH compare within expected ranges to the analytical results for the samples that were collected by Holtec, indicating that the two sets of samples are acceptable split samples or duplicates. Mass DEP and the Department of Public Health have prepared summaries of these sampling results and have provided them to the NDCAP co-chairs for posting on the NDCAP website. As noted earlier, the results were also made publicly available earlier today, and we anticipate that there will be news coverage of this topic today and/or tomorrow. In addition to sampling, Mass DEP and EPA are now in receipt of the NPDES and surface water discharge permit modification applications that were submitted by Holtec on March 31st, 2023. Consistent with prior practice, Mass DEP and EPA will coordinate their reviews of these two applications. The state will review the application in light of all applicable state laws and regulations. As previously reported, the application will require several state and federal permits and reviews, including an anti-degradation review by Mass DEP. Responding to questions raised at the last NDCAP, all interagency workgroup members are aware of public statements made by Governor Healy with respect to the administration's strong concerns about the proposed discharge of decommissioning water to Cape Cod Bay. The comments and concerns raised by the NDCAP and the public will be carefully considered in the state's actions. The Healy-Driscoll administration has serious concerns about the proposed discharge of decommissioning wastewater to Cape Cod Bay. The comments and concerns raised by the NDCAP and the public will be carefully considered in the state's actions moving forward. My next item is site assessment work plan. Sure. This is Gerard Martin. He works for Mass DEP and has been handling the sampling and analysis of the wastewater.
Thank you. So as Seth pointed out, we made the results available. We put together a little write-up on how we did the sampling and what we had them analyzed for, and put together a table comparing our results with Holtec's results. And there were a couple of errors that have been corrected or will be corrected. Initially, our sample was analyzed for iron and potassium, and initially Holtec did not do that. It's not a requirement of, they're not priority pollutants. They're not part of the permit. the existing permit. I think we did it based on potential issues from other power plants. Because there's a 6-month holding time, Holtec was able to have their sample analyzed for iron and potassium. It did not make it on to the table that we released today, but we're going to do a new table and upload that tomorrow morning. In addition, we noted that when Holtec provided us with the data, they gave us a table with their results, and there were some that didn't match up with us. They didn't have some of the compounds that we analyzed for. For example, when they did their PFAS analysis, they did the 6 PFAS compounds that we regulate, that Mass DEP regulates. When we do our PFAS analysis, we do a little more because we're kind of thinking bigger picture on, issues with PFAS down the road. So we typically do a lot more. So we did more PFAS analysis than they did and found a couple of low levels of some PFAS that they didn't analyze for. So the table actually says not reported that they were detected below the detection limit when actually it's not reported, meaning they did not do the analysis of those certain compounds, and the table will be corrected and uploaded tomorrow as well. I just wanted to outline that.
What's that?
Yep.
On the site assessment work plan, Mass DEP and DPH, working together with the Attorney General's office, are continuing to review Holtec's environmental site assessment work plan and radioactive waste management plan. In addition, response actions under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, or MCP, 21E, are ongoing with respect to prior notifications of PCBs and PFAS detections at the site. A Phase 2 comprehensive site assessment, which documents the nature and extent of the contamination and contains a risk characterization, is due to be submitted by April 21st of 2024. Other cleanup issues. Mass DEP's asbestos section continues to be actively engaged in overseeing the demolition activity occurring at the site and meets regularly with the company to manage the asbestos discovery and identification and abatement removal process. As Dave noted, inspectors from our office were at the site today. Mass DEP is continuing to evaluate Holtec's request to change its wastewater disposal system on site to a Title V system. On public safety, MEMA continues to work with local partners on public safety planning. That's what I have for my report. I'm gonna ask if anybody has any questions. That's when I was gonna ask Gerard to come up.
Mary Lambert.
Yes, I have questions regarding the sampling procedures. We had talked about the fact that contaminants over time can sink to the bottom of the container. And so therefore, the importance of either taking the sample from the bottom of the container or shaking it up. But obviously, you can't shake the spent fuel pool up, but somehow. I noted that for the separator pit and spent fuel pool, that samples were collected 20 feet below the surface. How far down is the bottom?
So I'm going to have to ask Mr. Noyes and Mr. Moylan for a little help on that. I'm not sure exactly where the bottom of the pools are.
The spent fuel pool is probably an additional 25 to 30 feet deeper than that. The bottom of so the spent fuel pool is 25 to 30 feet in addition to the 20-foot depth where the sample was taken. The reactor cavity, again, approximately the center line of the cavity, so probably, I would say an additional 20 foot down to the bottom of the reactor cavity.
Okay, thank you.
Like to add anything, Dave, about any circulation in those pools?
Yeah, we had, and we reviewed the protocol with DEP and MDPH, provided the protocol for recirculation, the point at which we would take suction, the point at which the discharge and the flow rate and the period of time to ensure that the volume was adequately mixed and provided for a representative sample.
Second, in the torus, the sample was collected from a valve. So where is that valve in relation to the bottom?
So the suction is taken from the Avantech filter skid. So we have a hose that is sitting on the bottom of the Taurus, at the bottom of the Taurus shell. And then that pump, that submersible pump, discharges to our filter skid. We took the sample on a bypass line on that filter skid. So it's off the bottom of the Taurus. Again, with DEP and DPH's review on flow rates and time to ensure we had adequate mixing.
Fine.
Dave, how is knowing the analysis that you've gotten here verified? Because you all seem to agree on what the contents is. How does that help you figure out how to clean it up to the degree that it can be cleaned up?
Pretty much just confirms the removal system that we had previously designed. There wasn't anything in these samples that would be indicative of a need to change our filter or demineralization system. We'll still use mixed bed deionization, and we'll use charcoal for any potential for organics. So it just confirmed the ability to be able to use the industry best practice for filtration of these effluents.
And just follow up. So do you have those filtration, the charcoal filters, whatever, on site, or do you prepare for that long in advance? How does that work out?
We do have it on site. We'll order additional resins as necessary. So we'll use the filter skid with the Avantech system. So that'll be a 2-micron filter with effectively a 0.75 micron rating when it begins to load. And then we'll use the Raddamin, which is 50 cubic feet of mixed bed resin and charcoal.
And is that like a once-through thing, or do you filter it a couple of times, or how long might that take for the 1.1 million gallons? Any idea? Just, I won't hold you to it.
Yeah, I think the filtration is probably on the order of 50 gallons per minute. So, yeah.
Seth,
Yes, sir.
next steps, timeline,
Oh, I had a question.
and, excuse me?
I had a question for Dave.
All right, so hold on a moment. So next steps in the process, potential timeline, we know they're going for an amended permit,
Yep.
but how far away from, are we from potential another round of testing?
I can't answer that question right now. The application's still under review. There are a number of, questions that are in play in terms of applicable requirements. So, yeah, I would not hazard a guess at all on that.
Okay, thank you. Mary?
Yes, to Dave Noyes. You said there was no need to change the filter system. Is it the same filter system that you used to prepare when operating your radiological environmental reports?
I'm not sure what you're asking me. The method of treatment, the filtration portion of it is different than what was used when the plant was operating. It is a new system. It's essentially a state-of-the-art filtration system that allows us to be able to remove and replace the filter cartridges rather than having to remove the filter media. The demineralization is the same system that's been in use at the plant for a long time.
Does it have increased efficiency? What I'm driving at is in the annual radiological environmental reports during operations, it was stated that the efficiency of removing stuff was about 90 to 95%, which would mean 5 to 10% was not filtered out. And so my question then, if you're using the same, then that would be what we would expect. Or are you doing something different? And if so, what?
I'd have to take a look at the specific reference that you had. I believe that 90 to 95% is a gaseous effluent efficiency and not a liquid effluent efficiency. If it is, I'll take a look at that.
Mr. Lambert's got a question.
Jim?
Mr. Chairman.
Seth, I was very happy to hear that you're going to require an anti-degradation review. I have one question with respect to that. Does that mean that you've decided under your CMRs that this is not an insignificant discharge?
So I can't answer that question specifically, Mr. Lambert, but it's in my script. We're going to do an anti-deg.
Glad to hear it. Very glad to hear it.
Okay, any other questions for
Anything else?
Seth? One last question, Henrietta.
Yeah, for Seth, I just didn't quite understand what you said something about Title V system, and I just wondered if you could explain it again.
So the existing wastewater system at the plant is a conventional wastewater treatment plant with a discharge, and there are so few people working at the plant now, and many of the flows have been reduced significantly, and so what the facility would like to do is install a Title V septic system, which would only handle sanitary requirements. So that's an application that's currently under review by Mass DEP. Is that it?
Yes, that's it.
So-
Thank you. Go ahead, Seth.
So I just have one editorial comment. I don't usually do this. But I think that in terms of the annual report, why don't we make it a living document, and let's get going on the 2023 annual report as soon as possible. Just a suggestion.
Okay, all right, moving on. We got one more thing left on the agenda, and that's public comment. So let's get a few people, 3 minutes apiece, and then we can, I will be looking for a motion to adjourn after this segment of the meeting. So I think it's Nathan from Western Mass.
John, if I could make just a 30-second apology.
Excuse me?
I asked if I would give me the amendment to make a 30-second or less apology.
You want to make an apology? Okay.
You understood me correctly.
All right, go ahead.
I would like to apologize to Pine, Mary Gatzlick, the other members of the panel, and frankly to the people in the public for my far too rapid response with respect to typographical errors. Quite clearly, there are a lot of those that, frankly, I haven't seen any reading it. Those should be corrected with the understanding, as someone pointed out from the audience, that there be no change in substance while doing so. I apologize.
All right, thank you. I believe it's Nathan?
Yes, sir.
Nathan, welcome. So just introduce yourself, Nathan, and how far did you travel to get here? And then we'll keep it at 3 to 3.5 minutes, okay?
And NDCAP panel, members of the public, good golly, it is good to be here. My name is Nathan Murphy. Before I even get started, I got to give Dave a little round of applause there. I'm a big fan. You know, he's got a real tough task been assigned to him. I think he's doing a terrific job up there, and he's credit for that. Now, Nathan Murphy, I come here from Shutesbury, Massachusetts, small wooded town, pretty far away, but I got good reason to come here. My father was a former employee of Energies, like some other people in this room, worked up at the plant at Vermont, and for that, I am most fortunate and very grateful. I've been on the sidelines and silent for too long about that and about some of these issues, and I come here tonight because I feel like we need a little bit of an integrity check around this whole process. And first and foremost on that, I just want to say I think it's just a shame that we made the move to decommission the power station at Pilgrim. I know it's in the past and it's a done deal at this point, but I think that that is something that we collectively need to recognize. Now, you know, I mean, Inconvenient Truth came out in 2006, all right? This facility generated 5 terawatts of carbon-free energy annually from 2001 through the time of decommission at about an 89% capacity factor. and you look at the compliance reports for DOER and renewable energy sources, we didn't pass 5 terawatt hours until 2016, right? So, I mean, it's, and let's see, you know, what happens when Entergy decides to exit the merchant reactor business out in the state of Michigan? Well, Holtec comes in, and they want to turn right around and get that thing back online with support from the governor of Michigan. So if we want to have some integrity, we need to stop painting Holtec as a corporate villain and consider lauding them as the climate heroes that they are. All right? Now, there's another thing that we need to have a little bit of integrity about, and that is the anti-nuclear sentiment and obsession with radiation that is pervasive in the media, in our political dialogues, and in the public imagination. Now, there's nothing that comes out of the anti-nuclear camp that doesn't come from a place of fear of the unknown or even outright deceit, right? Sometimes it's a strategy. And that's something that really needs to be rectified if we're going to have productive conversations about the way we're going to move forward as a society. You know, it's just a shame that this has gone this way. Maybe some benefits and learning aside that, you know, we're decommissioning this facility, which was a gleaming example of our civilization's infrastructure. Now, I'm going to try and wrap this up. I know that we got a time limit, lots of people to speak, but there's like, I have 3 questions that I want people to be asking. Now, if we come to our senses and start following the science and start realizing that, you know, a proposed release of tritiated water into the bay is going to have negligent, infinitesimal environmental impact, and I understand there may be some ongoing negotiations between Holtec and the town of Plymouth, you know, giving back to the community and this and that. Is there anything that anyone can think of that money would be better spent on than shipping that water out of state? And, you know, how many gallons of diesel are we willing to burn to do that? Number 2, how many tons of CO2 have been put up into the atmosphere since this facility has powered down as a result of our political leaders to take action and save it? And lastly, there's been, you know, last few years have been pretty rough when you receive the electricity bill in the mail, okay? And now I know there's a lot of hindsight stuff that goes on here, you know, but, you know, what would the impact have been on some of these recent price shocks on our utility bills had this facility still been in operation? I think these are some important questions that we should be asking. Thank you very much for your time.
Brian, you next. We should probably alternate between pro-nuke and anti-nuke, but Brian, you can go next. But before you do, Brian,
my name is Brian Campbell. I'm a
Brian.
retired electrical engineer, and I would like to express my strong support for the discharging of treated water, including residual tritium, from Pilgrim Nuclear Station into Cape Cod Bay. According to a report presented by Dr. James Conker in September 2022 to this panel, this is considered the safest scenario. It is important to note that tritium, when present at levels outside the laboratory, whether experimental or manufacturing, is harmless. For decades, millions of gallons of slightly tritiated water have been routinely released into the ocean, large lakes, and rivers from commercial nuclear reactors worldwide. These releases are conducted in accordance with globally accepted nuclear safety standards, and no adverse effects on the environment or humans have been observed. I would like to highlight the presentations by Holtec to this nuclear decommissioning panel, which demonstrate Holtec's commitment to performing the Pilgrim decommissioning in a truthful and open manner. Holtec should be commended for its efforts as a good corporate citizen. Unfortunately, the Massachusetts political establishment unfairly condemns Holtec, just as they drove Entergy to prematurely close the reliable and industrial cathedral Pilgrim Nuclear in 2019. This decision increased Massachusetts emissions by 2 million tons per year and eliminated 62% of Massachusetts' low-emission energy and resulted in the loss of 600 mostly union jobs. This is equivalent to burning 20 extra Boston Carita Rainbow/LNG tanks per year. Massachusetts clean energy and climate plans for 2030 and 2050 set goals for relying on expensive, unreliable offshore wind as the backbone of our future electrical grid. However, in October 2022, the 1,200 megawatt Commonwealth Wind project became non-viable
30
and
seconds.
unable to...
30 seconds, Brian.
Thank you. Unable to move forward under the terms of the contract, requiring costly renegotiation that will be shouldered by Massachusetts taxpayers and ratepayers. And I'd just like to close by saying that I hope you see Oliver Stone's movie called Nuclear Now. And I really think it's a good explanation of nuclear, and Oliver Stone was an anti, and now he is definitely pro-nuclear. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. All right, you're next. Just hold there for a second. Nathan, so you asked, it wasn't a rhetorical third question. I just want to let you know that in this town hall, we have a pretty active department heads, and one of the things that Patrick Farah does in renewables is that we have a program, aggregate. There's 22 or 24,000 households that are signed into a multi-year contract with electricity, and I think it's 9.8 cents a kilowatt. So they haven't seen any increase in the last couple of years. And it's simple to just call it an 800 number. You can either opt in or you can opt out. But it works very well. We saved millions of dollars for the ratepayers in this community.
And it's 100% green. Thank you. Good evening. Honorable committee members, community members, thank you for participating. My name is Art Disloges. I am here to represent the Massachusetts chapter of the Sierra Club, the oldest and largest grassroots organization dedicated to protecting the environment. I am also a town meeting member-elect for the town of Plymouth. Over the past year, there has been much concern on whether citizens, like you and I, have a fair and meaningful input to this panel, as well as decisions surrounding the decommissioning process. At its core, it is a question of justice. Do we have input to a decision that will affect our lives and our environment forever? More pointedly, do we even have the right to speak and give public comment at these meetings? Or are we only afforded time at the discretion of the chair? The supporting written rationalization of the report to the governor states, and I quote, "The public is here to observe the meeting." And I continue the quote, "may speak if permitted by the chair." Hence, we have no legal right to speak at all. This is not justice. This is not a public hearing. It is a public meeting. Generally, public meetings such as this do not guarantee a public right to comment. But this is not an ordinary public meeting. The enabling legislation for this panel states, and I quote again, "The panel shall provide a forum for receiving public comment." It is the state law. To me, this means that any of us have the right to stand up here and provide our views within the rules set by the chair. And even if the original legislation does not provide a right of public comment, Justice requires that it should. So, honorable committee members, I ask you right now, right here, to affirm the public's right to oral comment at these meetings within the guidelines set by the chair. Thank you for your consideration.
Good evening. My name is Paul Galvin from Yarmouthport, Massachusetts. You won't need a 3-minute timer for me. I've just got a couple of quick questions.
You're the best, Paul.
All right, that's my wife tells me all the time. In the latest submission by Holtec, I noticed that on Outfall 105, the revisions, there's a little notation that says 102 degrees with a 32-degree delta T. So is that delta T 120 plus, or is 120 inclusive of the delta T differential?
It was the delta T that was authorized when the plant ran circulating water. So that was a 32-degree delta T, 120-degree maximum. Okay. Under the current permit and under the future permit with Outfall 15, the maximum temperature difference will be 10 degrees.
Okay, so 112 would be the max?
The 70 degrees is as high as inlet temperature gets, so okay. No higher than 80 degrees.
And my other question / comment, I've heard in when I was online at the meetings and the last meeting and tonight, the term dilution used in talking about this discharge. And even tonight, I heard the term diluted salt service water. I have no background in nuclear, but I've been working for many, many years with special waste treatment in laboratories and bioscience and life science. And I've dealt with NPDS and local POTW permits for years. And there's one big paragraph that says dilution cannot be a means of meeting a requirement for discharge. And I just, maybe no one can answer this in this particular case with the NEPDs, but are they bypassing that dilution paragraph that I've seen everywhere for 25 years?
I can answer that. The dilution does not support NEPDs compliance. It supports radiological compliance. So it's compliance with the NRC requirements, and it is permitted under the NRC regulation. In fact, it's encouraged to ensure that the radiological dose is maintained as low as reasonably achievable. The analytes, the non-radiological constituents, those samples are taken prior to any dilution, and those limits are set based on that water.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have 3 more in the room, 1 remote, and after that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be very brief.
Yes.
Just wanted to start off by saying that by unanimous vote of the 5-member Plymouth Board of Health, I'm speaking to you tonight as their representative officially to this meeting. So this is not just comments that I'm, giving to you personally.
And you're the chair, correct?
I'm the chair of the Plymouth Board of Health.
And who are you again? I'm sorry.
Barry Potvin.
Okay, thank you, Barry.
I think you know me.
Okay. Well, but not everybody else does.
It's true. For those that don't know me, I do have a doctoral degree in genetics, and I spent 36 years teaching public health and genetics to pre-medical and pre-dental students before I moved to Plymouth. So a few things I wanted to say quickly, if I can. According to state and local law, the Board of Health has a clear mandate to do all that we can to protect our residents and visitors from immediate or potential threats to their health. In some cases, we know that it can take decades for these effects to actually manifest themselves, especially when they involve genetic damage. Looking at the NRC website, it seems that the NRC's main purpose is supposed to be to protect people and the environment from hazards associated with exposure to radiation. I searched, but I was unable to find any NRC obligation requiring that it should protect the financial interests of the nuclear industry. In terms of the other items, we've noticed at the Board of Health that many of the presentations here have been rather one-sided. So the Board of Health actually sponsored a public forum about tritium and its biological hazards and its health aspects. And we had 4, I think, very distinguished experts in the field that actually made a presentation. It's available. It was recorded on PAC TV. And I ask that you actually include the link to that set of presentations on the NDCAP website to provide some balance to the presentations. I think it's only fair. And finally, I just have a couple of quick questions for Dave. It's my assumption, I believe, if I remember, that the dry casks actually have carbon steel components as well as concrete. Is that correct?
That the overpack for the casks do. The multi-purpose canister is stainless steel.
Okay. And is it also true that intense neutron radiation has been observed to cause deterioration in the carbon steel components inside of reactors after many decades of use?
Yes, at levels that they're experienced within a reactor vessel, they can cause embrittlement of carbon steel, but not at the levels of decay heat not associated with fission that would be seen in a reactor fuel storage cask.
Okay. And have you noticed during the decommissioning and dismantling of the reactor buildings any sign of metal deterioration?
Nothing other than uncoated surfaces that you'd see in any marine environment where coatings are not doing what they should do. And we see rust.
So the reason I ask these questions is because there's some concern on the part of a lot of members of the public that the dry cask will be stored for an indefinite but prolonged period of time at their current site, since there is no other way to actually remove them and dispose of them. And so over a period of many, many years, there is probably some possibility that there could be some structural deterioration. And I assume that you have plans to monitor for that and to protect the public from whatever would happen as a result of that.
We do. There's a NRC mandated inspection requirement that comes with the cask license.
And the casks are warranted for approximately 25 years?
I don't know whether there's a warranty associated with the cask or not. I just don't know that.
All right. Barry, thank you.
Okay.
All right, Ben, thank you. You're on. Ben,
Okay.
one more, and then we got Richard Rothstein in the bullpen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the members of the panel, and I'll be brief as well because it's late. My name's Ben Cronin. I live in Duxbury. I'm a member of the Duxbury Nuclear Advisory Committee, but I'm speaking for myself.
Duxbury residents only get a minute.
I think there's an equal protection issue there. I'm not a lawyer. I should know when I say that. I just did, and I'll kind of forego a lot of the precedents that are early. I did want to note that the case that Mr. Lampert adverted to, Barron v. Calenda, is I think a very interesting one and one that is relevant here. And I'm particularly glad that the first two speakers, whom I commend, who made very good cases, were, as you said, Mr. Chairman, on the other side of the issue than I have been. Because I think what this gets to and what Barron v. Calenda gets to are affirmative rights under Article 19 of the Massachusetts Constitution. That article declares, quote, that the people have a right in an orderly and peaceable manner to assemble, to consult upon the common good, give instructions to their representatives, and to request of the legislative body by way of addresses, petitions, or remonstrances, redress of the wrongs done them, and of the grievances they suffer. In the Barron decision, Justice Scott L. Kafker was writing for the court, and this came down in March, and you can find it all online. He writes, quote, the text, history, and case law surrounding Article 19 provide for the, quote, fullest and freest, and he's quoting an 1854 decision there, discussion of public matters, including protection of fierce criticism of governmental action and actors, so long as that criticism is done in a peaceable and orderly manner and is consistent with time, place, and manner restrictions. Peaceable and orderly is not the same as respectful and courteous. There was nothing respectful or courteous about the public assemblies of the Revolutionary period. Now, I want to note personally that I think we should all be respectful and courteous. That's close editorial remark. There was much also that was rude and personal, especially when it was directed at the representative of the king and the king himself. I think I'll forego the extensive quote from John Adams, but I think the above makes it clear that there is an affirmative right to public comment. I appreciate this public comment period, and I actually appreciate everyone. I know that you have a counterbalance to make in terms of getting the meeting done. So I just wanted to offer the counter side of that. I know you've gotten pushback in the other direction, Mr. Chair, but I thought it was a notable decision, and I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cronin. And then there were two.
I thought I had like at least another half an hour from Ben. I'm going to be real quick as well. A couple of points that Nathan made too is that, yeah, we do need to be a little bit more courteous for Mr. Noyes. You are doing your job as much as we don't really agree with what's happening, but, you know, there is something to be said for professionalism. And also too, Nathan, it's not as much of an issue about anti-nuke as it is about anti-pollution in Cape Cod Bay. I think we've kind of gotten past that, and there's kind of a good mix in the room. But one of the comments, a couple of observations from some of the comments. I have 3 college degrees, and one of the things that Jim Lampert mentioned about changing spelling errors and punctuation errors and things like that, be careful. That can change context. Something as simple as moving a comma can change context. That's one of the reasons why I think, and I'm paraphrasing here, why Jim had suggested that. So with that, be careful. With terminology, distilled water is considered a processed water, and alkaline water that you can buy in the grocery store is a processed water. Be careful. You know, we tend to be mincing words here, and that, again, can manipulate the context of some of the information that's being presented. Which brings me to one other point, one other observation that was kind of frustrating earlier, is there were comments made about people being entitled to their comments. And that's great, but what we need to understand is that the group of people here are not only are they entitled to their comments, but they're entitled to or rather they're entitled to your opinion, was the quote. What we're entitled to is an accurate accounting of what's taking place. What we're entitled to are appropriate expectations and professional behavior from everybody involved. The public is entitled to accurate reporting, advocacy, protection, and input. You know, we need to stop sugarcoating and mincing the words. Call it what it is, because it's becoming insulting. You know, when we spend 10 minutes, you know, calling it processed water when it has radionuclides in it. Let's just stop this. We need to stop manipulating the context by manipulating the information that's given to the public. That is what the public is entitled to. And I want to thank everybody for allowing us to speak, and it's a very important part.
Thank you. Richard Rothstein.
Good evening, NDCAP panelists, old and new. It's been a while since, I think it was July of 2021 when I was last sitting on the panel with my colleagues and friends. I was wondering if Irina from Woods Hole is still tuned in on Zoom. I wanted to take off a little bit further on Pine's comment about Deer Island, if she's still there. If not, I can...
Richard, I think her and her, yeah, they're long gone.
Yeah. Well, for the record, you know, the Deer Island plant, that I recall from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, the plant was designed to handle hundreds of millions of gallons of wastewater. I think it was even up to maybe even 1 billion gallons per day of wastewater during exceptional conditions. And that 9.5-mile outfall pipe to discharge the treated wastewater was to take the contaminants, any residuals remaining after treatment, out of the Boston Harbor area where it used to go to Massachusetts Bay into the deep waters. I was just curious, just to compare what could be happening in Cape Cod Bay versus what's been happening over the last 20 years at Deer Island, even from a modeling standpoint. The NOAA model that Irina mentioned, how difficult it would be to use that model if it hasn't been done yet, just to get an idea of for a discharge going out there, what kind of levels come down our way into maybe Duxbury Harbor, Plymouth Harbor, Cape Cod Bay area, given the magnitude of that volumetric discharge. And also, if there could be any consideration as far as based on modeling, maybe even some monitoring, if it could be discerned, what kind of concentrations, even from a qualitative standpoint, even without modeling, from Wiz Hole's knowledge base and modeling experience, would you expect of any contaminant, whether it's non-radiological, and even if it were radiological, with the dilution power, what the dilution power is over distance and time of a discharge of that magnitude. Maybe that could help shed some insight on a perspective basis to what we're talking about here for Cape Cod Bay.
Richard, it looks like we're going to have her back at a future meeting, so then you could question her then.
I might not remember my question, but that's okay.
Okay, all right, Richard, you all set?
Yep, that's it.
Motion to adjourn? Yes, after the meeting, yeah. Okay.
So moved.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.